Well, in the first case involving Bahrain, I think that I would have to disagree with my colleague here. I think that the United States intends to allow a change to take place in Bahrain. The system will remain the same even if the dictator goes. So they don't necessarily, they're not worried about getting rid of one compliant dictator as long as the system remains the same. And so the fact that the United States at this moment is not backing the rebels in Bahrain or in Yemen or other places doesn't mean that they will not be tomorrow. I mean, keep in mind that 2 weeks ago, Syria wasn't even being discussed, and now it's on the front burner, and the United States is already making the same kinds of noises and ruminations about possibly what may come of Syria and how we may deal with it, even if the Secretary of State is at this point officially saying we have no plans of invading Syria. Nevertheless, we have some very heavy hitters in Congress, namely Senator Joseph Lieberman, saying that that the United States should do to Syria what it is now doing to Libya. As far as the balance question that you maintained, the United States can go on a semi-indefinite mode in this regard as far as applying military coercion to Libya, because she is, after all, marshaling the resources of several other nations, whereas we are not necessarily, we being the United States, we're not necessarily burdened with the overwhelming responsibility, militarily speaking, as we are in places such as Afghanistan and Iraq. The fact that this is something of a coalition where the efforts are being dispersed out, even if the United States does play the lead role in this, the fact of the matter is that we're getting help, and that certainly would add to the idea that the United States can prolong this thing for a while. That's number one. Number two, we have to keep in mind that Libya is, at least population-wise, it is a small country. We're talking only about 6 million people here, as opposed to Iraq, which was upwards of 40 million. So pacifying or rather overthrowing the existing government in Libya is not going to be as difficult a job as it was with Iraq. So I think that we could see the United States and these other countries going on for some time. I would like to address one thing, though, that was mentioned earlier. Whatever the United States says, we have to take this with more than just a grain of salt. The United States has said, certain things, and then it does the other. So when the United States is talking about not going after Gaddafi, not seeking regime change from an official position such as that of Hillary Clinton or even from the president, the fact of the matter is that we have to understand that if the United States government is opening its mouth and moving its lips, it is probably lying. And the latest development with this national council that is being now talked about, this meeting that has taken place in London, this has been in the works for a long time. They have planned on getting rid of Gaddafi for not just weeks or months, but probably for years, possibly even decades. And I would caution the people, particularly those who are, letting their optimism get the best of them with regards to these revolutions, that this is the same kind of optimism that the people of Iraq were surrendering themselves to in the run-up to the U.S. invasion of that country. They were believing that they were going to be free of this tyrant, of this dictator. And I guarantee you today, if you were to poll the average Iraqi, they would say that they had it good under Saddam Hussein. Something to just keep in mind as we put some temperance to this optimism.
Amjad Al-Safiti, we talked about Bahrain. Let's bring in Yemen into the picture, actually being the other country that the U.S. to this day is promoting a political resolve, pretty much not throwing any weight behind the protesters. I mean, this is a country which Saleh is accused of supporting al-Qaeda elements to get funds from the U.S. Meanwhile, the United States saying that they are helping them with their fight against al-Qaeda. What is your perspective on Saleh in terms of the United States? Is it only because of the United States? Maybe you could throw Saudi Arabia in the picture, that Saleh is still in power?
Well, I think when one talks about Bahrain and talks about Yemen, one is talking to two gateways to Saudi Arabia. And these are two sensitive countries, two sensitive states in the region because of the security and the stability in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And accordingly, I think whatever intervention or whichever country decides to intervene, one has to bear in mind that it has to be done in a certain way that will ensure a successful intervention. And hence, Bahrain, the intervention has been slow and cautious. And the same again with Yemen. But I think, to be honest, certain dictatorships, as we've seen in Tunisia and in Egypt, are wholly dependent on their armed forces. And if the armed forces decide to play a neutral role and not to actually tilt their support to the regime or to the dictator, then that regime is only dependent on their security forces. And we've seen how harsh that can be and how unreliable these security forces can be in supporting and sustaining the regime. I think the same applies to Yemen to a large extent. Yemen is not an oil-producing state as such. It's got some revenues out of oil, but it is not dependent on that. Its main importance lies in the fact that its strategic location and its neighborhood with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I believe that it is really a matter of time that the people in Yemen would be able to force Saleh into abdicating or giving up his presidency. I believe that really Saleh has no choices left. The army has deserted. We've seen a lot of senior military personnel and high-ranking officers deserting camp, moving with the rioters. And I think there is no excuse right now for anybody to intervene, because one can see that it is only a matter of time before the shift in power actually does take place. And what differs between Yemen and possibly Libya is, again, the fact that not much bloodshed has been, if you like, done, not much violence, not much confrontation, and it wasn't a bloody confrontation at any event that is taking place in Yemen, and therefore there is no reason for any Western power to use that as a pretext to intervention. What I also wanted to say...
But the massacre that happened on Friday, 52 people 2 weeks ago, I believe, in which 52 people were, well, upwards from 52 to 60 people were killed?
Yes, but proportionally speaking, that's a much lower ratio than what we've seen in Libya. But also what is important in Libya and the intervention, and it wasn't a rather swift intervention. It did take its time, and many people were urging some sort of intervention in Libya, is very much this, and one has to be wary of what the West sees this as an opportunity to actually counterbalance what they have done in Iraq. This is really a battle to win the minds and hearts of the Arab masses across the Arab world, to say to them, look, we are intervening here to protect the civilians in Libya, the Arabs in Libya, the Muslims in Libya, who all of a sudden do count as human beings.
Right.
And this is possibly to counterbalance their failures in Iraq, and also what you've mentioned earlier, counterbalance the lack of intervention in the Gaza Strip as well.
Okay.
So I think there are many angles that one has to address.
Let me come in here to go along this notion of winning the hearts of minds of the Arab masses. And Mr. Azikiwe, and I'm going to come into this with this angle. The U.S. military support of regimes. Take the case of Bahrain, for example. They're stocked with enough .50 caliber rounds to kill Bahrainis 4 times over. Not to mention Yemen. Of course, we can also mention Libya. And for that matter, we can actually mention all of the Persian Gulf states. The people that are protesting against these regimes are being used, have American-made weapons that are being used on them, whether it's the tear gas, whether it's the live fire that's being used on them. And the sentiment on the ground isn't so much for the U.S. when they know that these are U.S.-made weaponry. So how is that going to bode with the way it's going to reflect the U.S.'s image, the West's image, with the Arabs on the street?
I think it's going to be very damaging to the image of the United States and U.S. foreign policy in general, to most of the peoples within North Africa and the Middle East. I don't think the Arab masses are that naive. That's why we have to question the political character of the people who describe themselves as being a part of the opposition in Libya. They are calling for and have welcomed and cheered the bombing of their country by these former colonial powers and by these imperialist countries that are led by the United States. There have been civilians who have been killed in these bombing operations, and at the same time, it has to be taken into consideration that Libya has the largest known reserves of oil on the African continent. They have the highest standard of living of any other country on the African continent. The government there was head of the African Union in 2009 when Gaddafi came to the United States to represent the African Union and Libya at the United Nations. So I don't believe for 1 minute that the people in Africa and the people in the Middle East are welcoming this bombing of their country by all these different imperialist countries and their allies from at least 2 different Gulf states. I think it's going to have a damaging impact not only on the ability of the United States to have normal relations with people throughout the region, but it's also going to have a damaging impact on the Obama administration, its presidency, both domestically as well as internationally.
Okay, unfortunately, we have ran out of time. We're going to leave it there. Thank you very much. That was editor of the Pan-African Newswire, Bayami Azakiwi from Troy, Michigan. We also want to thank human rights lawyer Amjad Salfidi, who gave us his views from London, and also from Court Delane, co-founder of the Crescent and Cross Solidarity Movement, Mark Glenn. And of course, you, the viewer, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget, you can always send us your questions at newsroom@presstv.ir. Check us out on YouTube also at Press TV Global News or our website, presstv.ir. From me, Kavit Halfway, and the entire team, it's goodbye.